Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Hi, welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today we're going to talk about the anti-Trump Manifesto because we're in America and we can talk about this stuff. And here for the author is Bennett Reiss for his mother, Maritza Iberico, who recently died from COVID. I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you. It's still surreal, but it is what it is, and I'm doing my best to continue living, which is what she would want.
Definitely. Well, thanks for joining us to talk about her recent work, the Anti-Trump Manifesto. Do you know how long she worked on it?
About 2 years.
What I really like about the story is that her research was impeccable. She went to a lot of lengths to capture things that were firsthand information from President Trump himself. And she also made some good points. And her analogies with stories like the emperor's new clothes and how a child looks at different things that adults are currently not questioning was really well done. So how did she get into this?
Well, it's, I guess, a long story that stems from her background growing up in fascism in Peru. She was born into a military dictatorship in Peru, and she saw Latin America and her own country of Peru go back and forth from dictatorship to democracy, dictatorship to democracy. And then ultimately she moved for her college experience to Spain, to Franco Belaúnde's dictatorship. And she lived through dictatorships in other countries. And she always thought the U.S. represented this land of freedom and liberty. And she saw the election of Donald Trump as a dangerous path going towards authoritarian and fascist tendencies. And she was just, shocked at the direction the country was taking. And being a newly retired woman after a successful career as a teacher and Spanish language professor, businesswoman and advocate, she said, I have the time now. Let me try to express myself as a freedom-loving, independent woman who became an American citizen and has a voice.
How long had she been an American citizen when Trump was elected?
Let's see. She became an American citizen the year I was born in 1986. So from 1986 until she passed this year in 2020.
Wow. So she was really familiar with the country. And after living in Peru and Spain, it must have been a huge difference for her. So growing up, is that something she brought to your attention a lot?
Yeah, she was fascinated with U.S. English and American culture growing up. And when she was young, I believe about 13, she was very fortunate to have the ability to travel to Minnesota, actually, and do a study abroad or student exchange with a wonderful family in Minnesota that actually she became great friends with a girl who was her age there. And that family then went to Peru and did an exchange with her family in Peru. And after that experience in Minnesota, she just knew she loved everything about the United States. And by the time she finished high school, actually early at the age of 15, she was already pretty much fluent in English. And
how many languages did she speak? Because besides the research in this book, which is just incredibly, on
yes.
point, the English was so well done. So it seems like it would be at least her second or third language.
Oh, she spoke English and Spanish fluently pretty much her whole life. By the age of 15, she was already fluent in English. And when she moved to Spain, all students at university in Spain had to study one of the old languages. either Greek, Latin, or Arabic. So she actually chose to study Arabic. So she spoke a little bit of Arabic. And then her sister actually married a wonderful man from France, and she fell in love with French culture. So she also took it upon herself in her later years to learn French. And I was actually shocked a couple of times when we were on the border with Italy and France and randomly come across Italians that she could also speak Italian. So about 5 languages.
Wow. All right. So we have a wonderful woman who's moved to the United States. She made her life here, and she starts to see everything going wrong. What triggered her off to write the anti-Trump manifesto?
That's a very good question. Upon rereading the book in the past couple of weeks after her passing, there was one part of the book that really stood out to me. That's where she reflects on Hugo Chavez's weekly TV show he used to do when he was alive. That was the democratically initially elected leader of Venezuela who pretty much turned dictator. And every Sunday he'd go on TV and speak for hours in this flamboyant rhetoric about the glories of Venezuela and socialism and how Venezuela is leading the country in a new way. And she found it just repulsive seeing how someone like that would go on TV and address the nation with almost no tact and no literacy. And when I read that in the book, I was like, wow, like that's, I think what she saw was happening with Trump. And instead of a weekly TV show, was through his tweets and through this direct engagement in a very crude way to the populace and manipulating a lot of people into believing outright lies, which she points out throughout his book.
She did point out some good points, but I think the confusing part for American people is the way that he always goes after the media. And in a lot of cases, we're seeing that the media is the one making the mistakes. You know what I mean? So looking back at almost 400 pages and going through his tweets, you know, there are things that, you know, enrage you because, yes, this is wrong. The way he talks about women, the way that he can denigrate people. But then you turn around at the same time, like the other day, and when a reporter asked him, you know, what do you think these rioters want with Black life? Like an unanswerable question. So it makes it hard. What stood out to your mom the most that made her dive into like looking and cross-referencing?
I think the way she focuses on the tweets was her way of saying, this is his direct communication with the US population. These are his direct words. This is not being filtered through the media. This is not being filtered through a third party. This is him speaking directly to the US population. And I'm going to pick him apart or pick his words apart tweet by tweet because there is no filter. There's no translation. It's exactly what he's saying. And then researching through time-staking efforts to expose a lot of what he says was just inaccurate, misleading, and sometimes total manipulation of public opinion.
Definitely. So how did she start? Where did she write the book? Was she in America at the time?
I believe she started in New York, where we lived in Long Island, and she took it upon herself in 2018 and 19 to take, you could say, like extended vacations to visit her sister in France. And her sister in France is actually married to a Corsican Frenchman, and they have a house in Corsica. So she would spend about 6 to 8 weeks over those summers writing on the island of Corsica. And it was her way of disconnecting. And she was very fond of Hemingway, who I believe wrote a lot of his stuff in Cuba. So she used to say, this is going to be my version of going to Cuba to write. I'm going to the island of Corsica and sojourning to write my book.
Well, she was very clear at the way that it came across to her. How do you think she felt about Trump's immigration policies, being an immigrant herself?
One of the things that makes this country the greatest country in the world is the fact that you can come from anywhere in the world, move here, and eventually you will start to feel American. And like, she knew that person, like moving to Spain, her sister moving to France. I know this from having lived in China, and it's very hard to move to another country and eventually start to feel of that nationality. You can have a French passport, but for France to truly accept you and consider you a Frenchman or Frenchwoman, that's not, or at least not until recently, something that used to be. But for hundreds of years, you could come to this country from anywhere in the world and become a United States citizen and feel American. And she thought that it was just a slap in the face to the history and legacy of this fine nation that he treats immigrants so badly, and to have this hostile policy almost demonizing one of our greatest strengths.
I know she did a really good job outlining specific points he made, and it made you question his thought process because his wife's some immigrant. The entire country is made up of people that are not from America. You know,
Correct.
It's not all, the original inhabitants are American Indians. So America is really made up of people from all other countries. So I don't understand the thought process. But she put it together in such a way that you had to really question that policy and why he was doing it the way he was, what's going on at the Mexican border with all those children. I mean, all these people that are going down there and viewing it can't be wrong. And her sources were exceptional.
One of the saddest things I have to say, when I had to clean out her apartment, the amount of books and research materials I found, it was just shocking. Like, to think that my mother investigated so thoroughly all this stuff. Like, I was just in shock at seeing what I found. And I mean, I'm in graduate school right now, and I know what it is to read a lot of books every year, to do research. She did this on her own accord because she just felt passionately enough that she had to do something and speak out, and that there was no time like the present but to act. I'm so glad she did, because she's kind of left this legacy behind.
Definitely. It's all history, and it's laid out in a good way. She does often have her own opinion in here, but I think that she did a really good job giving people the resources to make their own decision. You know, this is what happened. And just the way it moves through and gives sources of videos, even where Trump is speaking. And I think the beautiful part about it is that, hey, this is America. I can write this. I don't think she would have been able to do this in Peru or Spain.
That's a question I don't know the exact answer to, but I know that in this country, we do have freedom of speech, and she was very proud of being able to exercise that right. And she felt, especially as an immigrant woman, it was almost her duty to speak up, because there's all these books coming out, but there aren't many Latin American women speaking up. And she felt, why not? I should be able to have a voice. I have the right to have a voice. That's one of the things ingrained in us when, as Americans, we have the right to speak up. So I'm going to do just that.
Good for her. So did you travel a lot when you were growing up with your mom?
Yeah. And as a young lad from Long Island, New York, I'd want on summer vacations to spend time with my friends, having super soaker fights at the park and playing basketball. And she always insisted, no, we're going to travel. So as a kid, and when I was 6 years old in 1992, she put a backpack on me, took my cousin and I to France and Spain, where we went to the Barcelona Olympics and Seville World's Fair and just backpacked around France and Spain for the whole summer. We would go to the Grand Canyon. We would go to Peru. And she always wanted to expand my horizons by letting me see the world and teaching me other things. In high school, she took me to England and France again. We took another family trip to Peru, to Machu Picchu. And she encouraged me myself to travel. I went all around Europe when I finished high school. And then I eventually actually moved to Asia and lived in China on and off for 6 years.
Wow. And the pictures behind you, are those from Peru?
Yes, this is my little sanctuary in my home office here. And I have pictures of ancient ruins, the Amazon, and you can't see them, but also the coastline, which is in front of me. Peru has 3 glorious places: the coast, which is a beautiful Pacific coastline, flanked by the desert, then the Andes Mountains, and then the Amazon rainforest. So I tried to decorate my home office with those 3 regions in mind.
That's a great idea. What about her stance on the right to bear arms?
I mean, she was a freedom-loving American citizen. So she respected the right that people should have the right to bear arms, but she felt it was kind of appalling at the abuse of this right. Like, do we need semi-automatic weapons? And do people need to have 10 guns? That's what she questioned. So she never wanted to infringe upon someone's right, especially considering the history of the United States and the Revolutionary War and the principles behind it. But she questioned how expansive it had become with these gun shows and the shootings we're seeing left and right and the extent of it, the prevalence of guns.
Well, she was well-traveled, so I assume the fact that the European Union has now banned all Americans from visiting because of the way the country has handled COVID-19. Do you think if the president maybe wore a mask at the beginning, that things might have gone a little smoother? Or is it just not taking the advice of the people around him that know more about the medical field?
I think if we would have acted sooner and more authentically based on evidence we knew from the rest of the world, the situation would be much better than it is right now. I mean, hindsight is hindsight, but if you look at around the world, the countries that are wearing masks, the countries that are practicing social distancing, the countries that are doing what the CDC and other health organizations recommend, their numbers are down. They're slowly returning back to life. The countries which have not, like ourselves and Brazil, are seeing the numbers start to rise in certain areas again and are having a harder time getting back to the way, or the new normal is what I'd say.
All right. And what about issues that came up, like Mexico quoting the president's dialogue on Mexico being the most dangerous country in the world? I mean, it is dangerous, but this isn't one of the biggest issues that she drew on. But then, it is very dangerous. So how much is nitpicking and how much should we really be concerned about of what she covered in the book?
I'd say everything is relative. There are certain areas I live now in an area like outside New York City. And if you go to certain parts of New York City, it could be very dangerous. Baltimore, Detroit have certain dangerous pockets of activity. But I mean, Americans go to Mexico all the time. There's Cancun, Acapulco. Mexico City itself has an amazing tourist industry and a restaurant sector that people love to go to. And I question the president's statement because right now we're seeing a rise in shootings around the country everywhere in the United States. And I would question if he's looked at the situations in certain parts of Africa or the Middle East and the dangers in those regions. And this blanket statement that Mexico is the most dangerous, I think, is another example of what she just loathed about the way he characterizes things without painting the full picture to Americans. And then he has his rabid supporters, as they call him, who just accept him for face value and what he says.
Right. So that kind of statement is where I think people get confused. So he mischaracterized it. But hey, Mexico is really dangerous. They have drug cartels. They have killing in the streets. But then on the flip side, you have to look at a lot of the other examples that she brings up. You know, the fact that he wouldn't model appropriate behavior by wearing a mask so that other people would until quite recently. Or what was there was just so many instances, the way that he talked to women, the way he talked to other men about women. Those were key to how we look at the changing dynamics that are going on in his office. Why do all the women keep moving out?
That's a good question. I think it also the double standard of she would find tweets of his about things he'd say about Democrats before he became president, and then discover new tweets of him doing the exact things he was demonizing Democrats and other people in society about. So this double standard just repulsed her because it was like a slap in the face to the presidency of the United States, who's supposed to lead by example, be able to look himself in the mirror and see someone looking back at him who has integrity and respect for not only himself, but for his fellow citizens. And that just didn't seem to be the case with this president to her. Not only the way he treated women, but the way he treated his coworkers and made others around him feel little.
Yes, which is another good thing about the book. I think it inspires people to ask more questions, to look at the real evidence, to consider some of the arguments that she presents and the analogies, which were cute and lightened up the whole story with different storybooks.
Yeah. At the beginning of each chapter, she tries to open up the chapters with examples from past books, like The Emperor Who Has No Clothes.
Yeah, they were adorable. And I just think the best part is that, you know, other people should look at it. It's a good resource for people to make a better informed decision. Look at what's right, look what's wrong, look what's questionable, like the inauguration. We were so much bigger than Obama, but one side shows this, while his shows this. Were you actually there?
I was not at Trump's inauguration, but I studied at American University in Washington, D.C., and I was at Bush's second inauguration and Obama's first inauguration. The mall was packed. And at Obama's inauguration, it was like standing room only. You could barely breathe. And it was a cold night, I remember. And I have friends who remain in Washington, D.C., and I had firsthand accounts of what President Trump's inauguration was like. And it was nothing compared to Bush's second or Obama's first. I can say that firsthand because I was at both of those.
So I think people need to look at the context that he's delivering his speeches in, what's really important to them, because I think the flip side is when, you know, they ask him an unanswerable question that you have to feel bad for him anyway, because he's a human being and nobody could possibly answer why these riots are going on the way they are. And wanting to get rid of the police force. Yes, changing them, I can completely see it. But what is his response going to be? How is this going to be diffused? I think that's what people should really look at. Is he able to do that and bring the country back together?
It's hard to say, and she points something out that's very interesting in the book, which is historically presidents have a calculated way they present themselves with dignity, respect, and invested research in how they're going to present their statements and arguments. And then the press will ask questions about follow-up to how they're going about to implement the things they've said they're going to do. It's been the reverse with this administration, where President Trump doesn't really come out with a calculated statement. He just wings it, and then the press ends up having to ask questions to his press secretaries on how to play damage control and understand what President Trump even said. So it's kind of reversed.
That's true too. But I think the confusion comes in when a lot of times you see the press behaving badly or taking things out of context, and you have to go back and listen to the whole thing, and you find, wow, they lied.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the press has not always been perfect through the years, but you would hope it would do a little better, especially when people have so much to question about what's going on. Is the president doing his job? Where you have one side that loves them, other people in between. And, it's just really hard to have any idea what's going on. But she did a great job laying it out so people could make an educated decision.
That's what I think it is. Listen, I'm here speaking on behalf of my mom, who wrote a book called The Anti-Trump Manifesto. I mean, viewers could look up my past. I have been everything from a supporter of Republican to Democratic to Green Party candidates to Libertarian candidates. But after reading my mom's book, I see she just lays out his own words. And yes, she adds her own opinion, but she lays the words out in his own words so the reader can judge for themselves and decide which way they want to go. And the press, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. The press treats all administrations, I feel, a little unfairly and tries to warp their words one way or another, depending on what perspective they're coming from, the left or the right. And President Trump is no different. He's being treated the same way that the press has treated all presidents. The difference is he just has no filter. And I think that exasperates the whole situation and makes it a lot more toxic than it needs to be.
Definitely. Well, thank you for sharing so much about the book and your mom with us today. I really appreciate it.
All right. One more thing I just want to say is there are times in life I feel that people have these great perspectives and positions, and they always say to themselves, I wish I had the time to do the research, and I wish I had the time to really investigate this. That's what my mom did. She said, I'm going to do this, and she set herself. There are friends who would say, your mom came over to visit me after working 8 hours on the book, just mentally and emotionally exhausted. And she really poured her heart and soul into doing something that people always say they're going to do. And that's the result of this book. It's a concise, it's an in-depth investigation that she poured her heart and soul into expressing herself and giving the world something they can read and digest.
Definitely. Thank you again. And everybody out there, keep asking questions. The Anti-Trump Manifesto, the name may not lure you in, but the contents and research will give you a good basis to make an informed decision.
Hola a todos. Aquí Maritza Iberico, reportando que ya terminé mi libro.